13th Congress. I am honored to chair this subcommittee, and although our name has been abbreviated, our focus and commitment to providing leadership and oversight over our nation's aerospace, aeronautics, science, and human spaceflight programs remain as strong as ever. I am more than pleased to be partnering on the subcommittee with Representative Donna Edwards of Maryland as our ranking member. Her voice on issues of critical importance to this subcommittee is valued and respected by colleagues, industry, and the space community, and certainly by me. I look forward to working with you, Ms. Edwards. I'd like to offer a welcome to all our new and returning members to this committee. I'm proud to chair not only the Science Committee's largest subcommittee, but also one that addresses issues that reflect the interest and passion of so many members of Congress. And no issue we will discuss will garner more debate, nor should it, than our efforts to reauthorize the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. This is the mandate for this subcommittee to be a critical player in writing and shaping that piece of legislation. I also want to thank full committee chairman Lamar Smith for his leadership and trust in doing so. Working with the chairman, with our full committee vice chair Dana Rohrabacher, and with our subcommittee vice chair Mo Brooks, who I had the privilege of spending time with last week in Huntsville visiting the Marshall Space Flight Center, we are ready for the critical work ahead. That work begins with today's hearing as we consider the principles proposed by Congressman John Culberson of Texas and Frank Wolf of Virginia in their legislation entitled the Space Leadership Preservation Act. They have offered us a proposal for many of the challenges facing our nation's space agency. Through the authorization process, we look forward to working together to implement those ideas which will or may benefit the agency in the long term. The missions that NASA should be focused on are complex. They are expensive, and they are long-term. Too often, decisions made, whether by Congress, by the administration, or within the agency itself, hamper and undermine the necessary commitment to programs and projects that require patience and stability instead of uncertainty and shortcuts. Today's hearings begins a conversation about how we can work together. As a subcommittee, Democrats and Republicans, members of the House and Senate, and with industry, academia, and the next generation of aspiring space explorers to ensure our nation remains firmly fixed on an ambitious and worthy space program. Even in these times of 11th-hour deals and manufactured crises, we must look to provide leadership for a long-term goal for NASA and our nation. In doing so, we will preserve America's hard-earned and well-deserved place as a global leader in space exploration. Thanks again to our witnesses for appearing before us this morning. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Palazzo, as we begin our first subcommittee hearing of the 113th Congress. And I just want to say how much I am looking forward to working with you and with the members of our subcommittee. We do share a deep passion together for the work of the agencies we have responsibility for overseeing, and I'm looking forward to the prospects of this Congress and us working together, as I know we will. We do have a lot on our plate during this Congress, including helping to set the future direction of the nation's civilian space program through the upcoming NASA reauthorization. And like you, I consider NASA's space and aeronautics program an integral part of America's innovation agenda. And I want to work to ensure that they remain strong and that they are fit for the challenges of the 21st century. This brings us to today's hearing. I want to start by joining you in welcoming all of our witnesses, including my good friend Chairman Wolf and Representative Culberson, the original sponsors of the Space Leadership Preservation Act of 2013, to give us their perspectives on what it will take for America's space program and to remain preeminent and vital. I want to thank Chairman Wolf for your support and help also with the resources that are required for the James Webb Space Telescope, really important to both our districts. The stated purpose of the bill would put it this way: to ensure that the American space program will always be the best in the world, and to ensure that America will always be able to preserve and protect our leadership in the exploration of outer space, and the high ground of the future. That's a sentiment I want you to know that I share wholeheartedly and endorse, and I look forward to hearing your views as I do the views of the witnesses on our second panel. Very specifically, the bill seeks to set in statute the term of the NASA administrator, to create a board of directors for the agency, and to direct that board, among other functions, to create a budget for NASA that would be transmitted to the Congress each year in advance of the President's fiscal year budget request. Now, it's been said that this bill attempts to model NASA's management on that of the National Science Foundation, but I would note that there are differences between the NASA and the NSF. They are very different agencies. One of the NSF's main functions is to issue grants for research. NASA, on the other hand, is an R&D agency. It has multiple missions and development programs, and it has operational responsibilities for, among other things, the International Space Station. The National Science Board, which governs the NSF jointly with the director, doesn't provide a budget to the Congress independently of the director, as is proposed in this legislation. I'd also note that a statutory term for the administrator doesn't necessarily ensure stability at an agency, but I am concerned about the stability of NASA, and I think it would be helpful to consider a term that spans administrations and that does create the kind of management stability that's needed at the agency. Nonetheless, for example, the current NSF director has announced his intentions to leave the NSF only 2.5 years into his 6th statutory term. So that alone doesn't ensure that you have the kind of stability that all of us are seeking. We have to also remember that NASA is not a business and can't operate as a business. It has different functions, even though we want to seek efficiency of taxpayer resources and that we value those efficiencies. We have to be clear about the distinctions between NASA and the work that it does in promoting our civilian space program and operating it, and the work that a conventional corporation or business would do. So it's not a direct transferable model. I also have questions about the implications of the proposals for the implementation of congressional direction that's spelled out in legislation, as well as potential unintended consequences. So I hope that we have an opportunity to explore those. And I do have some concerns right now for NASA, for the rest of the federal government, and for the nation as a whole, as we try to figure out resources in it and what I believe is an already strapped resource environment for the space agency. Those questions are looming on us even as this week comes to a close. And so while today's hearing will consider legislation that would stabilize NASA's direction, the sad truth is that we're in a Congress and we have to continually contribute to the agency's funding, but we also contribute right now in this environment to its instability and to the mismatch of resources with expectations. If we expect NASA to do great things, and I know that all of us want NASA to do great things, want it to inspire this next generation, we know that its employees have to have the kind of stability that they need to do the oversight that's important. And my experience working out at Goddard Space Flight Center is that whether you're a contractor or whether you're a civilian employee, you work in the same environment, and all of us used to just say we work at NASA. We never made those distinctions, and I think that the way that we need to think about the agency has to reflect that. Just a few months ago, as we all watched the Curiosity land on Mars, along with dozens, really actually hundreds of young people over at Goddard Space Flight Center, their enthusiasm was electrifying. They're the nation's future. Our agency has to reflect that future, and with that, I'd close. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point.
Yeah.
At this time,
I make a quick.
okay, the chairman does want to be recognized. I'll yield him as much time as he may need.
No, just a couple of minutes. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing today, the Space Subcommittee's first of the 113th Congress. The work that you, Ranking Member Edwards, and the members of this subcommittee do will have a lasting impact on our nation's continued leadership in space flight. Every time we convene in this room, the phrase, "where there is no vision, the people perish," should guide us, for these words from Proverbs are forever true. Today, a question exists about NASA's vision, namely whether there is one. But we must also recognize that even a vision without a means to achieve it can be fruitless and frustrating. So today I would like to thank two of our colleagues who, in introducing the Space Leadership Act, continue to show leadership on behalf of our nation's space program. My colleague from Texas, Congressman John Culberson, has been an advocate for exploration for many years, and I look forward to working with him to see that many of the missions and priorities we share are accomplished. And a longtime personal friend, Representative Frank Wolf, holds a key position as chairman of the Commerce, Justice, Science Committee on the House Appropriations Committee. Our working together will be critical to put NASA on the right track for long-term success. They come here today to offer suggestions and solutions to many of the challenges that NASA faces. We welcome their thoughts on this discussion. NASA too often is hampered by short-term decisions that have a long-term negative impact. We must step back, look at the agency as a whole, and help put it on a path to achieve worthy goals on behalf of our nation. I hope our work in this Congress will result in a vision we can all work toward to inspire future generations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, if there are any members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our first panel of witnesses, which includes the two sponsors of the bill. The Honorable Frank Wolf, the Congressman from the 10th District of Virginia and Chairman of the House Committee on Appropriations Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies, and the Honorable John Culberson, the Congressman from the 7th District of Texas and a member of the House Committee on Appropriations. I now recognize Chairman Wolf to present his testimony. Okay, then, Congressman Culberson, you're now recognized.
Chairman Wolf, as always, is very gracious, but this has been a team effort, and I want to thank you, Chairman Wolf, for all your hard work and support in this legislation and for NASA and the sciences. Thank you, Chairman Palazzo, Ranking Member Edwards, Chairman Smith, Chairman Hall, Ms. Rohrabacher, all the members of the subcommittee. It's a privilege to be here with you. We're particularly honored this is the first hearing that you've had this year, and to start off with what has truly been a labor of love for Chairman Wolf and I. We are all here in this room because we love NASA. We're devoted to space exploration and scientific discovery. We want to make sure America preserves its leadership role in the world as the best space program on Earth, and it's absolutely essential for our strategic security that America be able to preserve and protect the high ground. As you said, Ms. Edwards, this legislation is designed to achieve those goals, and by focusing on NASA governance, on trying to make the agency more professional and less political, by giving them greater stability, as you said, by doing everything that we can as policymakers to encourage the professionals, the scientists, the engineers, the astronauts at that agency to do what they do best, and as much as we can do so to get out of the way and help them achieve what they have done so well for all our lives. I'm a native Houstonian. Some of my earliest and best memories are of the space program. I don't really have any memory of Mercury, but I certainly remember some of the early Gemini missions and the excitement of the Apollo missions. Got my first telescope when I was 12. I mean, this has been an important part of my life, and there's no other agency, other than the Pentagon, the Defense Department, the Marine Corps, that are wonderful men and women in uniform. There's nothing else the federal government does can really inspire the human heart, can lift people up, and truly inspire whole generations of young people to be their best and to achieve beyond what they ever thought possible than NASA. They've done a magnificent job for so long, but they have been hamstrung, as we all know, by pillar-to-post funding, the budget cycle that forces them as a part of the executive branch to honor the budget request put forward by the President, and yet they know in the back of their mind that what they're really going to finally be able to spend is the money that Congress appropriates, that we all agreed to with Chairman Wolf's leadership and his generosity, not only for the Webb Space Telescope, of course, but Frank's been an extraordinary friend to the National Science Foundation and NASA. In tough budget times, Chairman Wolf has protected the funding that this nation needs to invest in critical scientific research in NASA. And then the agency, when they finally get the appropriations bill done, is safe for another few months and another year. We've watched this. I got here in 2001, and as I learned about the budget process, the appropriations process, the funding cycle, and the pillar-to-post way that NASA has to operate, it just became increasingly unacceptable. And I provided you with a chart that I actually got from, I learned from Mike Coates, the director at the Johnson Space Center, wonderful good man who's been with NASA about 25 years, recently retired, and Mike told me that in the 20 years he'd been at NASA, he had seen I think, I don't have it here in my testimony, I think it was about 25 programs created and canceled over that 20-year period that had cost NASA about $20 billion. And it's just unacceptable. You can imagine people of these rocket scientists and engineers and astronauts that devoted their life to exploring space, and they're given a chance to do it, and then the Congress or the budget rips it away from them. It's destructive to the morale of the space program, destructive to the psyche of the agency, destructive to the psyche of the country, and frankly destructive to them achieving their mission, and terrifically expensive in terms of dollars and cents wasted. And analyzing this with Chairman Wolf's help, we came up with this concept based on the way there's a couple of key pieces to this, members, that really want to, and I want to thank the subcommittee staff for helping us through this. But a couple of the most critical pieces are that we need to give NASA the ability to design and build spacecraft and rockets in the same way that the Navy, for example, designs and builds submarines and aircraft carriers, with stability and predictability. So that not only will that obviously save money, but allow the agency to focus those engineers and scientists on what they do best. The model for that, I think, is naval reactors. They're the gold standard, as we've discovered, that when it comes to designing a nuclear reactor, paying for it, and then building it under budget and right on target, naval reactors is the gold standard. And so we're looking to do that as well. That's why I'm already to 8 seconds left. That's why you see the budget recommendation come from the professionals at NASA directly to Congress, so that you and Chairman Wolf can actually see the honest numbers. What does the agency really think they need to achieve their goals? That's critical. The other critical piece is to allow multi-year procurement on the solid rocket boosters. NASA can buy those over several years in the same way the Navy, when they buy engines or parts for aircraft carriers or submarines, there's multi-year procurement. That's critical. The term of the director, certainly fluid. The idea is to model that after the FBI director to overlap administrations. The idea for the board of directors, modeled after the National Science Foundation, so they'd operate like the board of directors, for example, the policymakers at a school board, or the National Science Foundation, for example. Here's the broad general guidelines we think the agency needs to follow. Leave that up to the agency director, and obviously Congress would have the final say in where NASA is going. But again, leave it up to the professionals. And the model there, and finally I'll quit with this and pass it to Chairman Wolf, that we are really, I really encourage the committee to follow, is the decadal survey for the planetary sciences. You get all the best scientists together in a room, and they hash it out. Where should America, where should the priorities be when it comes to the next space telescope, or planetary exploration, or Earth exploration, or terrestrial, the outer gaseous, the giant planets, and they produce a list, and we should follow that as policymakers, where we've got the best and the brightest telling the Congress, telling the country, here's what NASA's vision is, and what we think. Here's an honest budget submission. Here's our goals, as in the decadal survey, and here's an honest budget submission that we believe is necessary to achieve those goals, that doesn't go through OMB, that doesn't go through the bean counters at the Office of Management and Budget, that's given directly to you, given directly to Chairman Wolf, so we actually know what's necessary to keep America's space program the best in the world. Thank you very much.
I now recognize Chairman Wolf for his testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the hearing. This is not a partisan issue. The problem has been under both Republican and Democratic administrations, and the original model, too, was also Director Mueller of the FBI, who has continued now and I think ends this August. It had 10 years since the tragic Space Shuttle Columbia accident, and the decision was made to transition to a new human spaceflight system. NASA has had 3 different administrators and 2 completely different shuttle replacement programs. Because NASA's human spaceflight plans were yet again abruptly altered at the start of the administration, the U.S. will now be without a shuttle replacement until 2017, more than 6 years after the retirement of the space shuttle, and that's just for this last decade. When we first introduced the bill last fall, and it was really Mr. Culberson's idea, the National Research Council Committee charged with reviewing NASA's strategic direction. We asked them to look nonpartisan. I'm not even sure who they were exactly, but they were the top people. They were directed for the creation to come up with these recommendations. They think this fits in precisely with what they were looking at. It does not surprise anyone on the committee to know that the NRC committee's final report, released late last year, found that NASA currently has no strategic direction. The problem has been significantly exacerbated with the cancellation of the Constellation program, which would have returned American astronauts to the moon. If you were to ask any NASA employee, astronaut, scientist, or engineer, or contractor what the agency's top mission or goal is, you would get a confused look and you would get several answers. Some would say the moon, some an asteroid, others Mars, or as some would say, we're just really a technology development group. I think we can all agree it's hard to make progress toward any goal if we don't know where we're going, much less when and how we're to get there. This has plagued NASA, as again, this is not an attack on any Democrat or Republican or any, it's just plagued them really for the last 20 years. By the time each administration terminates the last program and gets its favorite new strategy in place, years are lost and $1 billion of tax dollars have been wasted. And each time it happens, the American people are no closer to having the world-class space exploration program that they've been promised. I expect that this decade will be the make or break moment for the U.S. leadership. Maintaining our leadership in space is critical because space remains the ultimate high ground for our national security. It also has significant impact on our economy and on our competitiveness. Notably, the NRC committee found that no country shares the current administration's interest in going to an asteroid. Instead, they all want to join an effort to go to the moon. So the U.S. can either lead the effort or another country will step in our absence, which I think would be very unfortunate. And that country is China, which is a direct threat to the national security of our country. The reforms in the bill draw on the best practices of other agencies. Mr. Culberson said, National Science Foundation, also the director of the FBI. It will ensure administrators' term spans 2 administrations, maybe 2 Republican administrations, 2 Democratic administrations, a Republican, Democrat, Republican. But that person will be in office long enough to be held accountable for long-term projects. The board of directors concept is based on the National Science Board. And there's similar boards in the FBI that kind of look at these things the same way. They're not given the notoriety, but they are there. The direct budget submission to Congress is based on other agencies. Legal Services sends their budget directly to the Congress after they go to OMB. I think we make these changes, the odds of America maintaining its preeminence in space for the 21st century will dramatically improve. In closing, I know that NASA workforce and contractors are capable, but you can't keep changing back and forth in concepts, ideas, and administrators. And so by having a 6-year term and doing the other things, I think it would really be good for the country.
I thank the panel for their valuable testimony. The witnesses are now excused, and we will move to our second panel. Thank you. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to introduce our second panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Thomas Young, who is the former chairman of the board of SAIC and the former executive vice president of Lockheed Martin Corporation. Prior to joining then Martin Marietta, Mr. Young was director of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland from 1980 to 1982. During a 12-year career with NASA, he served as deputy director of the Ames Research Center in California, director of the planetary program in the Office of Space Science at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., and as mission director of the Project Viking Mars Landing program at Langley Research Center in Virginia. Mr. Young received his Bachelor of Aeronautical Engineering degree and a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering degree from the University of Virginia, and a Master of Management degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Our final witness today is Mr. Elliot Pulham, the Chief Executive Officer of the Space Foundation, where he served in that role since 2001. Before joining the Space Foundation, he was Senior Manager of Public Relations, Employee Communication, and Advertising for all space programs of Boeing, serving as spokesperson at the Kennedy Space Center for the Magellan, Galileo, and Ulysses interplanetary missions, among others. Mr. Pulham is chairman of the Hawaii Aerospace Advisory Committee, a former Air Force civic leader and advisor to the Chief of Staff and Secretary of the Air Force, and a recipient of the U.S. Air Force Distinguished Public Service Medal. As our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. I now recognize Mr. Young to present his testimony. Your mic, please.
Step one. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to present my views on the challenges and opportunities facing NASA today. I also recognize the importance of identifying actions that will mitigate some of these concerns. It's appropriate to note that there are many positive accomplishments of the civil space program and NASA that should be recognized. These include the completion of the International Space Station, which is a technological marvel, the development of a library of planets by Kepler and other solar systems, the landing of the Curiosity rover on Mars, and the incorporation of weather satellite data and models that accurately predicted the unusual left turn of Hurricane Sandy. These are but a few of the many recent accomplishments. There are concerns about the future of the civil space program that must be addressed in the upcoming NASA Authorization Act. I recognize that this hearing is one of many that will address these concerns. Before addressing the specific questions you cited for this hearing, I would like to offer my opinion as to some of the more significant issues facing NASA. I've been associated with the civil space program and NASA for more than 5 decades. I am more concerned today about its future than at any time during my involvement. Issues requiring attention include maintaining NASA as the premier science organization, space organization, maintaining the capabilities of the U.S. industry to be NASA's partner in implementing challenging space projects, achieving balance between the NASA program and the budget, establishing a credible human exploration program, recognizing the importance of projects focused upon understanding dark energy and dark matter, searching for Earth-like planets and other solar systems, returning samples from the surface of Mars, expanding our climate knowledge, etc., as identified in decadal surveys. Realizing the science and research potential of the International Space Station. While ISS is clearly an engineering and a diplomatic success, it is in danger of being a science and a research failure. Assuring sustainability of strategy and programs over many years and political cycles. Resources in terms of money, and maybe even more important, human talent have been wasted on canceled projects and aborted strategy to the degree that it's a national embarrassment. Depoliticizing NASA must be addressed. NASA has been politicized to the extent that the capabilities of NASA and the success of the civil space program are being adversely impacted. While others can add important concerns to my list, I believe it is adequate to begin the discussion of mitigation. I am a strong believer that a foundation of the many successes of the civil space program is the continuity of expertise maintained by NASA and the implementation expertise of industry. These capabilities are maintained and enhanced by undertaking challenging projects. Examples include Curiosity, the James Webb Space Telescope, SLS, and Orion. Studies, technology pursuits, and overseeing others are important, but will not maintain NASA and industry as world-class. Having more program than budget is wasteful, leads to program cancellations, and encourages taking excessive risk. All programs need to be budgeted to their most probable cost, and when the aggregate cost of all activities exceeds the budget, the lowest priority activities need to be terminated. Leadership has failed to establish a credible human exploration strategy. A starting point is to recognize that the only practical destinations are the Moon, the 2 moons of Mars, and Mars. A major effort is needed to establish a consensus as to the United States strategy for human exploration. This must be followed by funding the strategy. A strategy that is not funded is not a strategy. There are a small number of profound questions for which the civil space program is on the cusp of greatly increasing our knowledge. These include, are we alone? What is dark energy and dark matter? What is the future of our climate? Decadal surveys have identified projects focused upon these profound questions. The exploration of these questions should be treated as unique opportunities. I appreciate the economic challenges our country faces. However, this does not mean we should not pursue knowledge in extraordinarily important areas for which we have a leadership position. ISS is in danger of becoming a science and research failure. A significant portion of the NASA budget is spent on the International Space Station and its supporting activities. This concern requires urgent attention. A senior review should be established near the end of this decade to determine if the return justifies the continuation of ISS beyond 2020. This will put the ISS community on notice as to what must be done with a prudent deadline. The last 2 concerns on my list are the most challenging. They require leadership and a seat at the table when national issues are being discussed. The proposed Space Leadership Act is a response to these concerns, and the sponsors are to be applauded for their dedication to finding solutions. If the Act could be implemented as intended and all involved participants agreed to abide by its principles, it could have a significant positive impact. I worry that approval will be difficult and implementation is subject to too many unintended consequences. If I were king for a day, I would require that the NASA administrator be someone with demonstrated superior executive leadership credentials. The deputy administrator would be recommended by the administrator and be someone with demonstrated extraordinary technical and space project implementation skills. I would establish a National Space Council to oversee strategy implementation, assure program continuity, assure that the program and budget are in balance, and be an advocate for a strong NASA and space industry. I would limit the OMB responsibility to funding the approved strategy and not be responsible for the strategy or the tactics of implementation. I believe NASA and the Civil Space Program are on a declining trajectory. The next NASA Authorization Act must continue what was begun by the current Act of reversing this downward trend. Great nations do great things. The United States is a great nation, and the Civil Space Program fits the definition of great things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. I now recognize Mr. Pulham for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Chairman Palazzo, Ranking Member Edwards, subcommittee members and staff, thank you for your service to our nation, and thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. The Space Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit, non-governmental organization, and our mission is to advance space-related endeavors to inspire, enable, and propel humanity. Implicit in this mission is our belief that the exploration, development, and use of space inspire our nation and the world, enable us to dare and dream greatly, and propels us confidently into the future. On December 4th, 2012, the Space Foundation released its report on the future of NASA entitled Pioneering, Sustaining U.S. Leadership in Space. All of you have received a copy of this report, and I'll just speak briefly about it today while also talking about the connective tissue between this report and the contents of the Act. America's civil space enterprise has had to deal with many challenges over the decades, often technical, but even more often the superheated challenges of politics and the mundane obstacles caused by public administration. NASA isn't the only organization to have to deal with these issues, but we feel that NASA's very special nature has made these challenges more painful and difficult than perhaps they are for other federal agencies. NASA is without a doubt the highest profile and largest entity in America's civil space enterprise. All of us in this industry and the members and staff of this subcommittee share a passion for NASA and the amazing work done by the dedicated men and women who are part of the American space exploration enterprise, whether they wear a NASA badge or are part of the crucial industrial base that underpins everything NASA does. We want them to succeed. That's why we're here today. Over the decades, there have been many reports from many groups, commissions, committees that look for ways to help the agency succeed in its various missions. The Space Foundation found that many of these focused on fixing a single pressing problem or failure, on giving NASA a single targeted destination to work towards, or asking NASA to commit itself to developing some sort of a new technology. All of which are interesting, all of which are meritorious ideas, but in our view, most of these reports and commissions arose at specific points in time to address specific concerns of the day. In a larger sense, dissatisfaction over our nation's inability to deliver another Apollo moment has persisted for 40 years since Apollo 17 returned to Earth. When we contrast the almost visceral drive that we all have to see NASA succeed with the reality of a space program that has retreated to the point where America's space agency can no longer even launch a crew to the International Space Station, the Space Foundation concluded that there must be some pervasive systemic problems for NASA to have experienced all the challenges it has since the end of Apollo. We believe we could discover and articulate those and engage in a process that was self-funded, self-directed, over a year long, and serving no master except our mission to inspire, enable, and propel humanity. Thus, from the very beginning, no data was off limits to us. Our conclusions were not constricted or preordained, and we made it a point to be inclusive in our efforts. We reviewed and incorporated data from all the many varied reports, as well as lots of data on what other agencies do, what other government tools are out there for us. And very important to us is we were able to conduct our report operating under a Chatham House rules approach, which allowed us to have candid, productive, no-holds-barred, off-the-record discussions with experts that we could then synthesize to deliver a view that ranges not only from space experts across the U.S., but indeed from around the world. Our research delivered us to one conclusion, and that was that our fundamental conclusion has been that the plethora of competing and sometimes conflicting missions that have crept into the agency's portfolio over the years need to be sorted and rationalized against a single organizational purpose, not a benefit, not an array of constituencies or a destination, but a single clear purpose. Call it a mission, but something that consistently and clearly guides decision-making process. In short, we might call this Management 101. Put NASA on a strategic pathway, establish a clear and unwavering purpose, establish the management structure that allows you to pursue that purpose, and then put in place the resourcing plans that assure success. We believe this purpose to be what we call pioneering. We define pioneering as being among the first to enter a region, to open it for use and development by others, and being of a group of individuals that builds and prepares infrastructure precursors in advance of others. What we're talking about is a solid, sustainable, repeatable process that stimulates jobs, technology, and innovation, strengthens our industrial base, projects soft power abroad, and delivers all of the inspiration that we need so that our nation once again values science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We concluded many of the same things that are in the SLPA. Among our key recommendations were depoliticizing the agency by establishing a renewable term for the administrator, establishing formal short and long-term planning and guidance framework similar to the board of directors that's been discussed, deploying financing, appropriation, and other procurement tools found in other parts of government to permit NASA the flexibility it needs to succeed. We did not want to try and invent something out of whole cloth. We felt that there were plenty of successful models elsewhere in government. Our pioneering report is 70 pages long. I won't go into the recommendations any more than that, other than I would like to just comment on a couple of the similarities with the SLPA. We agree with the changes that are needed to get to the heart of this incompetence, indecision, and waste. We did look at the FBI director's term, but the term that we thought was most interesting and applicable was that of the Director of Naval Nuclear Propulsion. We suggest a 5-year renewable term for the NASA administrator along the lines of this position because we thought it's a good example. It's a very technical enterprise. It's a gold standard, as has already been said, and it requires a person very similar to the kind of person that we need heading NASA. We also share the view that many of NASA's problems are compounded by the mechanics of the budgeting process. We argue that many of the most effective mechanisms for addressing this issue already exist in the forms of funding mechanisms used elsewhere in government, for example, the revolving fund used in the National Defense Sea-Lift Fund. The two documents, both ours and the Act, agree that decadal surveys are good ways to order priorities within disciplines and provide a model for arbitrating technical disputes. And we specifically propose that NASA employ a regular, consistent planning process to produce short, medium, and long-term plans. In particular, we recommend the establishment of an oversight and appropriation activities that the Constitution requires of Congress can be supplemented by this detailed examination by this Board of Directors and by reviews every 5 and 10 years. Whereas the Act proposes essentially a quadrennial review, we had proposed a 5-year review. So. Like the sponsors of the Space Leadership Act, we agree that there is no single obvious point solution, but we as a nation need to have a clear recognition of NASA's purpose going forward. Thank you very much for your attention and for this opportunity.
I thank the witnesses for being available for questioning today. Reminding members that committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes. The chair will at this point open the round of questions. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. This is for both of you. What do you understand NASA's mission to be currently, and what do you think it should be?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's one of the problems is that we don't understand what NASA's current mission is. If you look in the Space Act, there are 26 different strategic priorities. I would submit that if you have 26 priorities, you have no priorities. We therefore have come up with this pioneering doctrine as what we think should be the underlying purpose. It establishes a 4-step process for accessing, exploring, utilizing, and then very importantly transitioning so that NASA can get on to the next exploration.
I think important to your question is to kind of reflect on why do we have a NASA. And I personally think that we have a NASA because we need an organization who is capable of carrying out space flight operations or activities. Most of the other stuff that NASA does, and I'm separating only the top of space, not the aeronautics part, but other activities are in support of that function. Except for the space flight uniqueness of it, most other things could be done some other way. So I think that the country established a NASA because it needed someone to be the leader and to have the excellence in executing spaceflight missions. Now, if you say, what is the purpose of NASA? I think NASA's fundamental purpose is aimed towards, one, expanding our knowledge of, that we can acquire through space projects, to, secondly, provide leadership for our country in the execution of space projects, and I think, thirdly, to be an inspiration to our people, and particularly our young people, as to what really are the factors that make this a great country and a great opportunity for them to personally pursue as they go through a process of education and deciding on career paths.
And now I'd like to ask, it's a pretty broad question, but it's an important question. What advice would you like us to consider as we begin the process of reauthorizing NASA? Either one. Mr. Young.
I tried to touch on that, identified 8 items, and there are probably more. But I think as you go about this process, each of those need to be taken into consideration. And I don't want to go back through it, but let me hit a couple. I personally am not as, I'm not as focused on any particular project as much as I am on the need of having an extraordinary NASA and an extraordinary industry. So I think we need to be more long-term as opposed to short-term in our views. I talked about International Space Station. I chaired the advisory committee for many years. I chaired an independent review of its management structure. I'm an advocate of the International Space Station. As I said, it gets a check in diplomatic success, a check in engineering success. We've got a long ways to go in the science and the research, and we're spending a lot of money on it, and we need to be sure that we do everything we can to maximize its return, and if we can't, that we go in another direction. I've got one other item. I touched on things like, are we alone in dark energy? I don't know quite how to say this in today's environment, but I think there are times to be bold and there are times to be austere. And you need to be bold when the returns are special. And in my view, pursuing the question of are we alone is such an incredible question. And Earth-like planets and bringing samples back and looking at some of the moons of Jupiter. I mean, we're on the cusp of really learning a lot in this regard. Dark energy and dark matter. Most of what's out there, we don't know what it is. And I really try to phrase it that way. Maybe it's always hard to do. But I think for profound issues, being bold is to be applauded. And on the other hand, there's time to be austere. So I don't mean that, you open the checkbook, so to speak. But I do think that it's critical with the resources that we invest in this area, that we invested in those areas that they have the highest return to the country. And knowledge in these areas stack up high in my regard as to things to be pursued. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is I actually think that the Authorization Act, the last one, I thought had a measurable impact. It didn't complete the story. I don't want to imply that at all. But it had a measurable impact of worrying about having things that are constructive to be done by NASA and by the industry and looking at some of the items. I think this act is absolutely critical to responding to the concern I have about being on a trajectory that's negative as opposed to positive. Thank you.
Mr. Pulham, briefly, if you'd like to add some comments.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just 2 different ways to come at this with the heart and with the head. In our report, we have outlined at great length, right down to a line-by-line rewrite of the Space Act, what all of the technical things are that need to be done. But I think that what's more important here is that the space enterprise uniquely has demonstrated in the past, and I believe can demonstrate again, an ability to lift our nation as nothing else that we do. It inspires our children, it encourages us, it demands of us that we be the best that we can be as a country. And I think a visible, strong, exciting space program that ignites our interests, that gets us interested in questions of our existence, that gets us interested in studying the hard courses and doing the hard things and demonstrating the American character, those are the things we should be looking for in our space program.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Edwards for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your testimony and for your passion. In light of Mr. Pulham's comments that he just made, Mr. Young, I wonder if you could talk about the idea of a destination, because I think that that's some of the push and pull. Should NASA have a big goal that is a destination, or more broadly, as the Space Foundation report suggests, to carry out the multiple kinds of functions that you need for a robust space program? And I'd like to hear your thoughts about that.
I think it depends on which part of the program you're talking about. I think for the science program, you know, our basic thrust is to understand our solar system and the universe in which we live. And there are tactics that are identified in the decadal surveys as how to go about that. Human spaceflight, in my view, is different. And human spaceflight can't be just about building rockets or building spacecraft. It has to be about defining how they're going to be used. And so I've heard this discussion a lot. I am an advocate in human spaceflight for destination. I don't see how, you know, maybe this is ridiculous, but, you know, Apollo had a destination. And so human spaceflight, I think, is a different kind of an exploration than the robotic. The robotic is more of a program. The human is more focused on an activity. So I believe that a destination is critical. And as I said, after having thought about it quite a lot, I know it's a little bit beyond what you were asking, but I originally thought an asteroid really was a pretty good idea. It didn't have any gravity, you know, it was probably pretty easy. That's not really true. An asteroid mission is a hard mission. It's long duration. There are not many of these things. They're small. You don't walk around on them. You kind of swim up to them. So that's caused me to rethink this destination, and that's why I really touched on my comments. I think that for human spaceflight exploration, there's a small set of destination in our lifetime. It's the moon, it's Phobos, it's Deimos, and Mars. They're significantly different. An asteroid, Lagrange point can all be steps in pursuing something such as that, but they're not destinations that are either, in my view, practical, or are they destinations which inspire?
Let me just ask both of you, in order to get someplace and to do these big programs, one of my big frustrations with NASA is that it's tough to do science on a year-to-year, what's my budget going to be? And I think many of us share that frustration. I think certainly within the agency and the industry that is true. And I have long been curious about what it would mean for the big programs to construct a budget or a process that would allow for that kind of multi-year, don't have to ask every single year, what's my budget going to be, so that I can manipulate the program and the work to fit that budget, but to work toward the science. Can you share with me, especially from an industry standpoint, Mr. Young, what that would mean for both for the agencies and for the contractors to have a little bit more certainty when it comes to the science, and whether you think that would also contribute to more realism in the budgets that are presented for these big flagship programs?
Well, I think the answer is yes. Let me comment a little bit. We actually had that, and whether or not we've gotten off with Mars was really a program, not a project. And we recognized that Mars was one of the, really challenging scientific pursuits of kind of our era. And we learned that every step along the way, we built on what we learned from one mission to what we did with another mission. And I think that, through the decades of surveys and other, we had a program that was laid out pretty much into the future. And maybe not funded into the future, but I think the stability was pretty good. I must admit that some of the actions in the last year, have at least interrupted that process. Whether we're back on it or not, I don't really know. But leading up ultimately to a sample return. So I think decadal surveys, which are over 10-year time frames, they provide the basis of that. I had the privilege of being both on the astronomy and physics decadal survey and the planetary decadal survey, so I was able to observe firsthand incredible debates that go on, in that process. And the results really are roadmaps, and they're well thought out, well supported roadmaps. So I'm with you. I think a science program, I can't see any advantage to juggling it every year, so to speak. It is clearly benefit from stability. And back to industry, I mean, the key to success in industry is a stable strategy and a stable implementation plan. That responds to new information, but doesn't respond to, gee, I'd like to rethink it again.
Thank you. And my time has run out, but eventually I'd look forward to hearing from Mr. Pulham on this, too.
Now recognize Mr. Rohrabacher from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'd just like to be on record as thanking my colleagues, Mr. Culberson and Wolf, for taking into consideration some of the concerns that I had toward their legislation as they were developing it. And I just want to thank them very much for taking those concerns seriously. A couple things that I'd just like to focus on here for a moment. Mr. Young, you're talking about the depoliticizing NASA, and you seem to be blaming politics for some of the failures that NASA has had over the years. Do you consider, for example, the X-33 program to have been a failure for political reasons? Was that a political failure?
It's a great question, and I had great fear you would ask that question. I've been trying to, in my mind, define, when something is politicized. And I'm not sure I can do it, but I'll offer at least some of my thoughts on it. I think what has happened over my involvement with this activity is that a ambiguity as to direction allows a lot of people to be experts as to what it is that should be done. And what I mean by that is that I think that NASA, and not only NASA, but I've recently led a review of the nation's weather satellite programs, and I find a similar circumstance. I think what happens is that perceived direction kind of comes from a lot of different areas, because different people have kind of different organizations, different levels, have a latitude of interpretation in the lack of a crisp, firm strategy or a direction. Now, I don't know whether that's what politicizing, really means or not, but that's what I see as the difficulty that exists.
Well, we've had some situations where NASA just was involved in a program that couldn't be done, or they were spending money in a way that was not effective and thus expanded the need for a higher budget, which we couldn't afford. Do you think those type of programs should, think we just should continue these programs?
No, in fact, we should not. Possibly maybe even should not have started them in some instances that we could go into. No, I am not an advocate for continuing something that is determined to be either too difficult or without sufficient merit, and I really talk about the prioritization. But I do think that there are other examples where it has been this environment that I've talked about that has caused change in direction.
Well, let's take a look at when you're talking about destination and purpose, which we just heard a little discussion on here. It's as if there are not a destination is in some way is so inspiring, but certain purposes may not be inspiring. Just For example, I happen to find it very inspiring that NASA might have a mission to help us identify near-Earth objects and create some sort of a system that could defend us against that. I think that might be exciting to the public. Might be exciting to the public that NASA is doing something to help us create a program that would clear space debris. Now, these are not exploration and things that we can talk about in dramatic language and words that sound, you know, the pushing back the universe. But these are really necessary jobs that need to be done if we're going to protect our space-based assets, which our lifestyle is dependent upon. Our standard of living is dependent on GPS and weather satellites and all these. If we're going to have those space-based assets, we got to start worrying about the debris that's up there. Now, these are important projects that NASA could be doing, and it seems to me that while we're trying to put some pizzazz in things and make things look magnificent in keeping with the exploration of past Americans, well, we got some hard work to do as well as some of the more glamorous work to do.
I would agree. The only caution I would make is that I think they are important functions, but they are, if that's the ultimate goal, not very inspiring.
Well, I think let me just say for the record, and I know I'm running out of time here, I think it is really inspiring that people who collect the trash in my neighborhood are inspiring to me because I know what it would look like if they weren't doing their job. People who clear up space debris and permit us to have these assets up there are doing and it's a very tough job. I think that's inspiring. I think our young people would think it was inspiring just as much as trying to spend maybe hundreds of billions of dollars to go to Mars and maybe not being able to finish the mission because it was too costly to begin in the first place. Just a thought. Thank you very much.
I now recognize Ms. Bonamici from Oregon for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Palazzo, and thank you also, Ranking Member Edwards, for holding this hearing. And especially thank you to the witnesses. When we're here today talking about the mission and the management structure and the goals of NASA, an issue that I know is important to many of the members on this committee as well, as you who have testified, is the importance of STEM education. And I really want to talk about two different kinds of education here. And one of them that's important as we have this discussion is the education of the public about the benefits of space science and space exploration. And I have an example that I'll share briefly, and this is from the Oregon State University, and it is just a folder about the NASA impact just through this one university system. How NASA funds make a difference: coastal imaging, ocean and wind dynamics, ocean productivity, phytoplankton health, long-term forest trends, education and mentoring, carbon exchange, protection of endangered whales, who would have thought, and leadership. And so just in this one university, there are all these impacts from NASA funding and a NASA partnership. And I think it's important that the public know how much space exploration and space science impacts our everyday lives. And I also want to talk a little bit about STEM education and the importance of inspiring young people. Mr. Pulham, did you in your report consider, I know you briefly mentioned STEM education, did you consider the sort of knowledge gap that's developing with fewer students going into STEM fields, and how a strong, vibrant space system will encourage young people to study in the STEM fields and go on beyond an undergraduate level?
Yes, Congresswoman, thank you very much. We are, in fact, a big part of what we do at the Space Foundation is involved in STEM education across the country. And, you know, I do things like this, I do things like meetings, but there's nothing I do that is more energizing and rewarding than walking into a classroom or bringing a classroom of students into the Space Foundation, where we have special, unique laboratories where they can drive robots, where they can see what's going on in real time in the cosmos. The implications of a program that excites the imagination are tremendous And our young people have not become cynical yet, like some of us who have been around for the political battles. If you stick them in a room with an astronaut, by golly, they are there with an astronaut. We sent a group of people to Fairbanks, Alaska 2 weeks ago, and the pictures and the stories that came back from the experience of having astronaut Leroy Chow visit Fairbanks is just phenomenal. So, in fact, I'll send you a copy of an article I've written that's going to be published in the next couple of days that talks about this, and it talks about the context of the recent meteor strike and my frustration with the fact that most of the news coverage started with a reporter asking an expert, now, what is a meteor? We should have all learned that in grade school. We should know what meteors are. We shouldn't have talking heads explaining it to us. And so the data behind how we have trailed off in education, and you know, it's interesting, I know statistically correlation does not prove causation, but you can track NASA spending and enrollment in higher education programs and higher degrees in science and technology fields. If you look at the Apollo ramp up and then look at the enrollment ramp up, then you see Apollo trail off and the enrollment trail off, and then you see the space shuttle development and the enrollments goes up. This is really important to our competitiveness as a country.
Thank you, and that wouldn't be surprising. Mr. Young, you have comments about that?
I think that Elliot's comments were really quite appropriate. I did stumble across an item very, very recently to add to your list, which was quite striking to me. As I said, I've been leading a review of our nation's weather satellite program. I am told that for Sandy, had we not had satellite data, it would not have, the models would not have forecast the left-hand turn. The forecast would have been that Sandy would have gone up a normal path up the coast, and there would have been no warnings to New Jersey and New York. So that's an interesting item to add to your
that's
list.
Significant. It does seem that NASA is sort of uniquely positioned to inspire, but you know, by actually showing the fruits of the labor and the programs that have worked, inspiring our young people to go into STEM fields. And in my remaining few seconds, I just want to encourage all of my colleagues to keep those broad goals and impacts in mind as we consider this and other legislation in the subcommittee. Thank you again, and I yield back.
I now recognize Chairman Hall for 5 minutes.
I thank you, and of course I thank you for having this hearing, and I thank Chairman Smith for giving us this new leadership. And I want to recognize Bill Smith, a longtime employee here that gave us good advice and was part of the family of Republicans and Democrats as we pursued saving NASA and making some plans for NASA back when you could plan for NASA. And how valuable NASA is to us and to the youngsters, the people. And Mr. Young, Tom, you hit on it about where almost these studies, they almost gave us the guidance. They really, well, I think probably Norm Augustine's one of the really great people and a giant for this committee and for giving us advice. He gave us the advice. He just said it was going to cost money and that was up to us to find the money. And that's exactly right. We've had so many things to inspire us, the moonwalks, Sputnik, medical gains, and great people, some that lost their lives trying to make this thing work. But the real problem is the last several presidents just haven't given us the money or helped us support the funds or have blocked the money that should have gone to NASA to carry out some programs that we had. And there was time when and NASA is important as it is, and how dangerous it would be if we lost this space station. What a national threat it would be to us. It makes me sick when we don't have a half of 1% of the budget for the thrust. And it's outrageous that they couldn't find that money. Either the last 3 or 4 presidents just didn't find the money that they could have found somewhere then, I think. or if we found it, they turned it down. And then my question to you is going to be, the president is presumably the chief policy setter for the direction of NASA. But his direction early when he first got here, and I don't know who told him that, to run a line through Constellation, but that was just devastating. It's not devastating to run the line through it. He had the right to do that, but he had the duty to give us a way to go if he was going to run a line through. And he threw away $8 billion that the Democrats and Republicans together had put together to spend at that time. And we just never recovered from that one line through there. You know, my dad was in World War I, and I asked him who he remembered more than anybody else during that war, and I thought he'd say the General Pershing or Adolf Hitler or somebody like that. He said no, he remembered the bugler. They wanted to kill the bugler because he woke him up every morning. And even Broadway had a play on someday I'm going to murder the bugler, someday they're going to find him dead, and then I'll get that other pup, the one that wakes the bugler up, and spend the rest of my life in bed. That was very popular at that time. Well, I'd like to know who that other pup is that told the president to run the line through at that time and not give us any guidance thereafter. So those are, I guess, that gets me to my question. It's the general consensus that NASA has no overall direction at the moment. And my question is the creation of an independent body like these two fine congressmen have suggested as to whether or not that's the best way to ensure a solid direction for the space program. That doesn't solve the money. It's be harder to get now than it ever was. But we had so many great people that were leading us in, not just guys like Norm Augustine, but Dr. DeBakey came and walked these halls out when we came in one vote of losing the NASA program. The overall thrust of the program came in one vote of it, and that old fellow walked every step out here, and then we won the next vote by over 100 votes. We got back on the right track. But how to get on the right track, the Buzz Aldrins, the Neil Armstrongs, the late Neil Armstrong, General Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan, those that walked this way and gave so much. I guess how's the best way to ensure some kind of a solid direction for the space program, or something that Congress ought to demand from the president? And as we demand it, help him find the funds. And I think I've used most of my question asking the question, but.
Yes, Congressman, I agree with your observations. I think one of the things that troubled us and really tickled us into doing our report was the damage that occurs to NASA between administrations, and even from election to election as different people on committee memberships and so forth change, and the need, therefore, to have essentially a board of directors, if you will, that functions like a board of directors, but it reports to Congress and it reports to administration. But it's this board that provides that independent outside analysis that sets the strategy and ensures that all of the activities of the agency are appropriate to that strategy so that we're actually accomplishing something.
I think my time's up. If I have any to yield back, I'll yield it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
If I could just make
Mr. Young, go ahead.
Make two comments. First off, Mr. Hall is my hero, and so I sat and listened with great interest, and I worked 5 years for Mr. Augustine. So my comment is the following. I think the Authorization Act that you're about embarking upon is extraordinarily valuable. I think over time they haven't had the impact that the last one had. The last one, in my view, fundamentally didn't solve all the problems, but it put in place some of the tools that are necessary. I think the SLS and the Orion are a product of the last Authorization Act, to tell you the truth. I think it was impressive, it was rather bipartisan. So I personally believe that as this Authorization Act comes forward, I think that a lot of thought needs to go into it, but a demand for a human exploration strategy and needs to be a critical part of it, and a recognition, as I tried to say in my comments, a strategy without funding is not a strategy. So I think the country needs to decide, and I don't know of any better mechanism than the Authorization Act that's upcoming to get that subject out on the table and to get it properly debated and to get some constructive decisions made as to where we go in that regard. So that would be kind of my response is not the right word, but my helping with the items that you were raising so effectively.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize Mr. Stewart from Utah for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the hearing to the witnesses. You know, NASA and this committee is of great interest to me. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is personal. I'm a former Air Force pilot. Had a chance to do some cool stuff in that regard. Now it's not going into space, I recognize that, but it was still kind of fun. There are a number of contractors in my district, both large and small, that build engines and avionics, and significant parts of contributions to this program, and that's true of many districts around the country. But the third reason, and I think it's most important, is that it's just important to our nation. It's important in regards to research. It's important in regards to product development, and frankly, it's important to our morale. And I don't think we can minimize the importance of that. It's important to how we think about ourselves as a nation, as a people, and as leaders around the world. And look, I know that the political and cultural environment is different now than it was, say, in 1969, which I remember. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Apollo received a lot of public support and economic support because not just because we were going to the moon, but because we had to beat the Russians there. There was an element of competition to it. There was an element of perceived national security to it. And that's just not true anymore. I mean, it's hard to recreate that sense of urgency when things have changed like they have. I've had the opportunity to spend quite a lot of time with the director and with other members of the leadership there, and my concern is this, and it's been stated a number of times here, but I'm going to ask you a specific question regarding that. I don't feel like we understand the vision. That's, again, restating what you have said and others. I don't think there's many Americans who could tell you, do we even have an American on the space lab right now? I don't know they know that. Do they even know that it's up there any longer? Do they know the space shuttle has been grounded? And so my question now is this. How do we recapture that vision? I think it's got to be one thing. I mean, we used to say we're going to the moon, and now we say, well, we're doing this and this and this. And my question is this. It's been proposed that we go to Mars. Is that viable? I mean, is that a realistic goal? And if it is a realistic goal, is that something that you think the nation would coalesce around, and when could we do it?
Thank you, Congressman Stewart. Interestingly enough, after this hearing, I am going to be going over to the National Press Club, where a private group is about to announce a private mission to Mars. So is Mars doable? You bet it is. What it takes is it takes will, and it takes direction and focus. And focus and understanding your purpose as an agency is what this report is all about. And I'll share one anecdote with you. As we went around interviewing people, several people brought up the story of a CBS News reporter who was at the Vehicle Assembly Building to interview an astronaut, and the astronaut was late. And the reporter engaged with a janitor who was mopping up an area and asked the janitor, said, "What's your job?" And the janitor said, "Well, sir, my job is to help put a man on the moon." And if you went to 100 different offices in different NASA locations in this country today and asked that question, you would get 100 different answers. And that is the problem that has to be fixed.
That's the key to it, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Very quickly, how this private enterprise to Mars is funded with private money, I'm sure, obviously. How are they paying for that, and when is their schedule? Do you know?
I'm not at liberty to discuss the details of what they're about to announce because it is their announcement, but it is something that they are going to look for some collaboration and relationships and expertise with NASA but the funding is going to be privately provided.
It's going to be disappointing for some of us if Google goes to Mars before the United States government can. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You raised some interesting questions. I think to rekindle the excitement is an important item. I personally am a Mars advocate. I was mission director on Viking, where we landed a couple spacecraft on Mars and put a couple spacecraft in orbit about Mars. The one thing that's important to recognize is a Mars mission is not easy. Landing a few tens of megatons of stuff on the surface of the planet is extraordinarily hard. The planet is complicated in that it has a little bit of atmosphere, but not a whole bunch of atmosphere. And all of that makes that process difficult. Long duration human spaceflight is not something we understand very well, and is also difficult. I took the liberty in my testimony to be king for a day, so I'll expand on that. If I were king for a day, I would have the ultimate destination Mars. I wouldn't just kind of say it, I mean, I would say that that's our orientation. I mean, we really intend to send humans to Mars. But then what I would do is I would build my program around that. So that would be, if I could say it, that would be my beacon. But then that would tell me that one of the things I had to do was a Mars sample return, because I've got to have a sample back on Earth and understand it before humans go to Mars, in my view. That would tell me I need a major research program, a technology program, not a scattergun technology program, if you allow me to say so, but a focused technology program to understand how do I land a few tens of megatons of stuff on the surface of the planet. That would be a project that an organization like the Langley Research Center could get its teeth in, with vigor. But back to what Ms. Edwards said, you've got to have stability. You can't decide I'm going to do that this year and the next year say, oh, I didn't really mean that. But so I would be an advocate of Mars, the ultimate destination, being serious about it, not just giving speeches about it, having it as a structure, but then everything fits into that. So each step along the way. Now, I don't know what's going to happen this afternoon, but I don't know exactly when that happens or when it takes place. But what we're doing is building to that. That would be my strategy for human exploration. I go back to what you said, not to take over a lot of time, but I am a product of 60s, 70s, 80s at NASA, and there are a few things I remember. I remember never worrying about what we were doing. I mean, the dedication and watching it was there, and I don't just mean Apollo. We were doing Viking and other stuff. The other thing is a little bit what Mr. Rohrbacher was kind of touching on. Throughout my NASA career, I never remember anybody telling me at a press conference what to say. I never recall ever being given a script. I never recall much interaction with anybody other than the NASA leadership exercising our mission. And what I'm really trying to say about this politicizing question, I'm a big believer if you have good people who have a clear definition of what it is they're trying to do, the rest of us are not dumb. I mean, we are able to understand that, very, very well. So that's the NASA I recognize, not the NASA where when you have a press conference, you get a script as to what you're supposed to say. You get an input as to what you're supposed to do. If you come to congressional testimonies, it's reviewed multiple times. I never had a press conference, a briefing, a talk, pre-reviewed of anything I ever did in almost 20 years at NASA.
Thank you.
I now recognize Mr. Posey from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe it's very clear that almost everyone believes that NASA lacks direction, and we need to somehow find a way to establish that direction and continue that direction. And it's my sense that the Space Leadership Preservation Act is the best shot we have at that. I mean, it sure beats continuing to flog the troops hoping to improve morale, you know. You know, the beatings will continue until morale improves. I mean, this is the first thing I've seen proposed that will kind of give us some continuity, and it's kind of positive. And I like your vision. I like everything both of you have said. In your written testimony, Ms. Young, you said, I worry that approval will be difficult and implementation is subject to too many unintended consequences. And that's one of the first things we worry about. You know, we try not to do any harm. We want to do good, but the first thought is do no harm. And I'm just wondering what kind of unintended consequences you might envision so that we might also be alert to that. So.
I suspect the top of my list is the members of the board. And, you know, I looked at the process by which they are, you know, identified, and, you know, 3 here and 3 there and 1 here and 1 there. And I've watched committees be put together, and I've watched committees that can really have an influence, sometimes the lobbying that takes place, you know, to become a member of the committee. So if I could pick the board of directors, I'd be totally satisfied. and what I mean by that is one unintended consequence is that the board becomes a board with an agenda, a defined agenda, as opposed to being the statespersons that I think is really necessary. Now, I think there are people out there who can be the statespersons in that regard. But I think it, again, the unintended consequence would be the wrong board would be a disaster, you know, for it, just as an example. So as I tried to say, I think if it could be implemented exactly as it is intended, you know, no question it would have a positive impact. But that would be one of my unintended consequences.
Okay, I think we all wonder about that too, and sometimes, as you've learned over the years, perfection is the enemy of good.
Yeah.
And it may take a little more effort for the people with different agendas coming from different places to change the program. I mean, I'm from the Kennedy Space Center. I heard the president campaigning saying he was going to close the gap between the shuttle and Constellation program. And nobody in the world was more shocked than I when, as the chairman said, he redlined the Constellation program. That's not closing the gap. That's making the gap eternal. So I'm a little bit less worried about what damage the board could do right now. But appreciate your input on that, and well taken. And again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding this hearing, and I thank both you witnesses for your input. I yield back.
I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their great questions and comments. The members of the committee may have additional questions for you, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from members. The witnesses are excused, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Oh, it's lovely being with you.
No, it's
Thank you. You too.